Hey folks, welcome back to the Hermit's Land podcast. I know it's been a bit, but well, such is the nature of these times. I want to share with you before we get into the podcast that there are some moderate level changes to the way in which I'm moving forward with the podcast. The first thing that you'll probably notice is that this is a new seasonal format. So instead of trying to release episodes every couple weeks, I'm going to release a batch of 6 episodes in the spring, 6 episodes in the fall, and 6 episodes in the winter. They will just be collectively whatever I'm doing at that time and whoever I want to talk to, but they'll be there for folks to check out. Secondly, I have decided that the Patreon wasn't really working for me, and so I have canceled that. It no longer exists. However, what I'm doing moving forward is asking people who want to support the podcast to do so through either Buy Me a Coffee or direct PayPal or e-transfer if you're in Canada. The links for all of that stuff is in the show notes for the episode. And, I think the first thing that I want to say about supporting the podcast is one of the things that you're supporting is accessibility. Because for 6 episodes, it costs about $470 US to provide transcriptions to ensure accessibility for everybody who wants to get on board and share in this. And I think that it's on all of us to help make that happen. And then, of course, any money that comes in above that will go towards supporting the podcast itself with hosting and technology and blah, 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 all those things as well. So that's the second thing that I want to share with you. The third thing I want to share with you is Google is mixing up their business with FeedBurner, which is the way in which people who receive this by direct email are getting this. So I want you to know that Google is getting rid of that. So what that means is starting sometime soon, you will stop getting those emails, and there's nothing I can do about that. So if you want to continue to receive updates about the podcast by email, please jump on over to the website and sign up for my newsletter. You will get some extra stuff. There's nothing I can do about that either. The newsletter comes out every 2 weeks and showcases workshops, new products, other information and projects that I'm doing. And during the run of the podcast, it will also include the links to the podcast. If you don't want to do it that way, then my suggestion is find a podcast service that you love or can work with and start checking it there. It's on all of the major downloads: iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and probably a bunch of other ones as well. I've set it up in lots of places. All right. And so with that, here's episode 116. Me and Barbara Moore catching up for our annual talk. This one was recorded back in December of 2020. I hope you dig it. I hope that you will pitch in to help support the podcast and support accessibility. And I love hearing your feedback, so drop me a line and let me know how it goes. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Hermit's Land podcast. I am here with Barbara Moore, and usually around the end of the year, Barbara and I record one of these episodes. I think that this is number 5, if not number 6 in that series, and I'll certainly be sure to list all of those in the show notes for it. And I assume that everybody knows who you are, Barbara, but for those who might not know who you are you? What's going on?
Oh, 2 different questions. Who
Right,
am I?
start with who you are.
Who I am. I am a couple of things. One thing, I am the acquisitions editor for tarot projects, books, and decks at Llewellyn Worldwide. And that is what you would call my day job. And my other job is I also create my own tarot decks. Well, I create the ideas and then work with an artist to bring them to life. And I've also written a few standalone tarot books. I do some teaching, a little bit less lately, but yes, teaching at conferences and workshops and whatnot around the world. And yeah, if people are going to know me from your podcast, that's probably what they'll know me for. It is my work with Llewellyn and my own published work.
Yeah. So it's been another year. We talked last fall, and you were still living, I believe, on a farm in rural spaces out on the West Coast. So I mean, aside from the nightmare that is COVID and all of the things related to that, what else has changed for you? You've moved, right?
Yes. Last fall, we intended to move back to the Midwest because rural California was a really fun adventure, but it really wasn't for us. We missed a lot of the things that go along with living near a larger city. And we also missed the Midwest because we did. And so we decided to move in the spring. And then COVID hit, and in the spring when we were going to move, and we thought it's not smart to move right now because my wife would have to find a job, and how would someone find a job in this environment? And I also wouldn't, well, there were lots of reasons. So we decided to stay where we were so she could keep working and we had somewhere safe, but we were nowhere near our families, nowhere near. And it just kept getting harder and harder. And finally, the universe kept giving little shoves, like, it's time to go, it's time to go. And then finally the internet went out. It was out, and it's a rural area, so there's not a lot of options. And the service provider wouldn't even answer the phone when we called. They would never call us back. They just ignored us completely. And so we had a couple of other internet providers come out, and this was in August, which is fire season, which meant the skies were completely filled with smoke because they are for like 2 months every summer. And so because it's rural, it's all radio satellite based. So the guys would climb up on the roofs and they're like, yeah, we can't see our poles. We can't get a signal. So we can't service you, at least not till the fires are done. And so we couldn't get internet. We didn't know when we'd be able to, which meant I wasn't working. And I needed to work because, reality. And so we kind of took that as a final sign, like, okay, just go. It's going to be hard. It's going to be scary. You don't know where you're going or what's going to happen, but it's clearly time to leave. So yes, so about a month ago, we moved back to the Midwest, and we're still not sure where we want to be. So we're staying with family for a while until we figured that out. So that's a fun adventure. Adult families kind of living together and making it work. So that it's a big change from California. It's a completely different lifestyle, completely different living situation. And when we were in rural California, COVID was a thing, obviously, but it didn't change our life that much because we didn't do anything, which was part of the reason we wanted to move back to the Midwest, to do things, to go to theaters, to go to museums, whatever. But when we moved back here, we really got to see how the city changed. Well, and we had the riots here, the George Floyd riots, and driving around the city and seeing what, the places that got burned and destroyed, and seeing the memorial, which we, did all that right away when we got back. It's been heartbreaking to see what has happened to the city that we loved, and we left it 3 years ago, and it was so it was like the best place in the world to us. in lots of ways. And then so many places that we loved are gone now, restaurants, breweries, things like that. And places burned down, boarded up. Yeah, it's living situation has changed a lot.
Yeah. And how are you coping with that? How are you getting by with all that amount of change?
What has been probably my main practice since COVID is trying to stay one day at a time and not get too focused on the future and wondering what's going to happen or what we could possibly do. Also, like paying attention to the reality that I'm in and recognizing that basically 100% of the time I'm okay, right? That I'm okay. And it's only when I start thinking about what I've lost, we, the world, everybody has lost, collectively and individually, what the future might look like, all of that. That is when I would get in a not great place. So trying to stay focused in the moment, pay attention to what I'm doing, don't worry about anything outside of the day, has been really helpful. Mm-hmm. And sometimes nothing has been helpful. Sometimes it's just been hard. I have never spent so many days doing nothing and wondering if I would ever do anything again, like creatively or work-wise. I'm not working on a deck or a book. I got nothing. Right. I'm doing my day job, like I said earlier, my Llewellyn acquiring, but any creative work is no, not happening. Yeah, so the change. So just staying where I am, knowing that I'm okay, being grateful, obviously, being grateful for what we do have, and trying to find joy and happiness in just the littlest things, because that's what we have right now. Helping other people, reaching out, those sorts of things have helped. I mean, it's really no one thing. It's a collection of things, So, yeah. And I think you're going through lots of change. I maybe not moving house, but still change. Everybody is, realistically, even if nothing in your circumstances have changed. Everything has changed. How are you coping?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going through plenty of change, life has been hectic. The first round of lockdown here, because I own a store, was pretty challenging. I'm very fortunate to sort of be partnered with a essential service business, which was very helpful for me around kind of getting through in the absence of any support from like government or other places. And here we are 9 months later or whatever, and we're back in lockdown in Toronto again, during what would normally be the busiest retail season of the year for me leading up to the holidays, right? But, it is what it is. I have been doing my best to really tend to basics. So I've been eating my vegetables, whether I feel like it or not. And I've been working my body to regulate the stress, So before stuff got locked down, well, in the spring, I was doing a lot of cycling to, Toronto has some pretty remote places for being a major city, and so there are a lot of places where you can if you can cycle for an hour, you can end up kind of away from everybody and in nature and so on, right? And so I've been doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of that. When the climbing gym reopened, I went back and started climbing a lot and doing a lot of that just to like burn the stress off, like last night I went for a ride, and since lockdown again, I've been going back to cycling, and I've seen foxes and beavers and deer and, all sorts of stuff, right? Snakes and birds and everything, right? Like lots and lots of different things. And it's pretty amazing. And I've been trying to tend to my sleep. Like it's all the super boring stuff, right? Like there's nothing super exciting about a lot of it because it's really just kind of the basics of things, you know. I've been sort of dropping in and out of my creativity. Lately, I've been making more time for it again, which was good. During the summer, I was spending just a lot more time outside and like leading into like, all right, let's take the kids and go to the beach. Let's go do this. Let's go do whatever, you know, just to get away from stuff, right? Yeah, you know, I mean, those are the biggest things that I've been ultimately doing to try and manage it, and also just, you know, I was talking to a friend, and I'm in a fortunate position where I have a lot of skills and a lot of things. So when we were talking about how the government was not supporting small businesses here, like the way they say they were going to, they was like, well, what are you going to do about that? And I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to have to get really creative about growing, shifting my business and so on, you know? And so I've actually been working a lot to make sure that things continue, to make sure that things stay afloat, you know? And so the experience that a lot of people had where they're like, I'm going to deep clean my house. It's like, I just went into working like 60, 70 hours a week at the beginning of this journey because that's what I had to do to kind of like get by, you know? And, yeah. And so I'm still I'm starting to finally shift out of that a bit more because things are more stable for me now, but also just being busy with that. It's like, well, it's better than sitting around feeling bad and, you know, scrolling endlessly on my phone. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know why what you said reminded me of this, but one of the projects I did have to do this year was I had to write for the text for the 2022 tarot calendar because I've been doing that every year for them. And I remembered talking to a friend about it, saying, I'm having a hard time getting started with this calendar because I don't know who we're going to be in 2022. And my friend had the opinion that, well, we're going to be who we always have been. It's a tarot calendar, right? Tarot's, you know, but for me, tarot stuff, a lot of it is so colored by my personal current world views, you know, because you pick any tarot card, you can interpret it so many ways. Usually what comes out is, you know, what I've been steeping myself in lately, and also trying to craft that so content is useful to as many people as possible, you know, trying to make it accessible and applicable. And if I don't know what we're going to be like, how we're going to be thinking, what kind of things we're going to be facing, it just made me stall on that project. It could very well be I was just kind of semi-depressed and was looking for excuses to procrastinate, which
is also,
you know,
fair during this year.
Yeah. So I eventually did get it done, obviously, and my editor has not sent back the edited version and the queries yet, and I haven't looked at it since I wrote it. I'm going to be real curious to see what I wrote, if you know what I mean. Because it was kind of done in a fog, because everything these days is a fog, and I'm just hoping it's not too harsh and too fatalistic, because I know how I was feeling, and I could see some of that coming out, and I don't think that's what we want in this project.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess it raises a question. You know, I know you just said you didn't know, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. What do you think is going to be different coming out of this time? What do you know, like we're we're recording this at the start of December 2020. You know, there's promises of vaccines and stuff over the winter and into the spring or summer, depending on where you live and what's going on. You know, there's just a change in government, which is not fully finalized yet. Maybe theoretically, right? In America, anyway.
Right.
Yeah. Who do you think we're we're going to be coming out of this? What
Well,
change do you think will happen?
well, there are a couple of ways it could go. One, we could just get over this crisis and then just go back to practically normal with no change, which would be sad because there's opportunity for growth when you go through crisis. I mean, this is like all the fives and tarot put together happening right now. And if change doesn't come, if you don't grow from that, it's kind of like you just went through it for nothing,
Right.
maybe. But you get bragging rights for surviving, so that's something.
Yeah.
Another way, okay, here's something that has been bothering me a lot in terms of, is it okay if it's slightly political? I'll try not to mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm not generally very political, but I feel like, okay, I feel like America, and I can only speak for what I think of America right now, is that the state that we find ourselves in, this state where 50% of us think one thing and 50% think another, because that's basically where we're at. I mean, you can tell election results that are 0.3%, we're half and half. We're divided. I would love to see us move in a direction where we shift, because we spent many decades, well, actually, all of American history basically is the individual is paramount. The individual is the most important thing. The individual's rights, freedoms, success, acquisitions, all of that individual. And so that is the premise of America, I think, if we want to get super, super simplified. Now, America also, because it has such a diverse population, does not have any kind of universal initiation from childhood to adulthood. And I think that is like the thing that's destroying us right now, because if you look at how we're behaving like teenagers, children who haven't been initiated, who don't know what it means to be an adult. And I think part of what it means to be an adult is to accept responsibility for other people around you. And that's not a super popular notion in America. I mean, most of the people who don't want to wear masks are choosing to not wear a mask because they don't owe the other person in their space anything. All they need is their own freedom, and it doesn't matter how it affects anybody else. So I've gotten a long way from your question is where do I think we're going to go? But that whole, we have no initiation, we are a bunch of adult children, has been really big on my mind lately. But so where I would like to see us go is I'd like to see us shift a little bit from I can get whatever I want and that should be my focus and I should achieve my potential and my, and move into a more community aware, other people considerate kind of place to live your life from.
Mm-hmm. Well, one can certainly hope, right?
Yes, one can.
I also think that mixed into that, I think there's I think that certainly individualism is a part of it, right? You know, and a part that we all need to sort of try and find a way to reconcile somehow. But I also think that there's, you know, this piece where you know, I've had this conversation in a variety of levels around tarot, around magic, around, you know, sort of broader senses of things about this sort of the end of expertise, right? And how people, the modern age, the social media age, allows people to create these sort of expressions of expertise that are not grounded in
not necessarily grounded in experience, right? Not to say that they don't know what they're talking about or whatever, who could say, but that like, I remember when I first met, people who would be considered kind of the elders of the tarot community, Mary Greer, Rachel Pollack, a bunch of other people. And we, one of the questions that I would ask people in my early podcasts is like, or in other dialogues was like, well, how long should you be reading cards before you become a professional, right? And the consensus amongst most of those people was 12 to 15 years, right? And maybe that's unreasonable, right? I know for me it was 15 years of working with the cards before I started being a professional reader. But I think there's something different when people have achieved a certain level of study in things or a certain level of knowledge, right? And I think that I don't really want to get, if you're listening to this and you're mad about masks, don't email me. I'm not going to answer. I'm just going to delete it. I don't want to have this conversation. But I'm going to say that one of the things that I find interesting is the amount of people who are like, well, I've read the science. And I'm like, I just can't believe you because I can't read the science. I mean, like I can read third generation articles about the science. Maybe I can read the summary of the science, maybe. But as soon as we get into the science itself, I don't actually have enough knowledge to read that stuff, right? And there's this sort of rejection of people who actually have expertise that is really problematic, right? Like really, really difficult and hard to reconcile, right? And if we have this issue where we don't have people we can count on or rely on to be experts, or opinions, evidence or other things aren't really taken into consideration, then what are we doing, And then what we're doing is we're defaulting to, feelings and emotions, aka cognitive biases and personal biases and cultural biases, as opposed to, towards things that ostensibly should be more concrete or more real or more universal, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, yes, I agree with you. I cannot understand the science either. I haven't even tried because I know I don't have that kind of background. So then if you know you don't have the expertise, how do you pick the experts who you're going to trust, right? I mean, I know who I pick, and mostly it's just because they sound sensible and not insane.
Yeah.
But I don't know that they're not insane.
Well, I was having a conversation with one of these people, and I was like, and they threw out some data about something, right? And I'm like, that doesn't seem real to me. I'm like, that is not a thing that I've heard anywhere else. And I was like, I'm gonna look it up and see what I can just, because I got my phone in my pocket, right? So I'm like, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right, John Hopkins has some stuff about this. I'm like, are we going to agree that John Hopkins is a body that we could probably listen to on this side, right? And they were like, yes, we're going to agree with that because we're going to listen to them because they, whatever, right? John Hopkins had something to say that was completely different within the point the person was putting forward. And they're like, oh. And then they still turned around and said, well, but blah, 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 blah. I'm like, but here's this difference in facts, right? Yeah. I mean, the problem, and sorry, I cut you off too. You're going to say something else.
I don't remember. Keep going.
So, I mean, and the problem is that, like, as like mammals, we're not good at making decisions in chaotic and problematic circumstances, right? Like, our responses and our biochemical responses and all that stuff are not geared towards consideration and other things. They're geared towards reflexive behavior, right? So yeah, it's tough.
Right. Well, yes, and I don't know if this exactly ties in, but all of this also has me thinking about qualities that I think are important for leaders, governmental, political elite. Public servants is what they're supposed to be. But I know for a long time, people who are running for office or whatever tout their achievements and their knowledge, their expertise, and all of that, and that's fine. But I have decided for myself that I would rather have a leader. I mean, if a leader has those qualities, great. But if they don't, I'd rather have a leader who has the ability to listen to the wisest people on whatever topic is under discussion and to act accordingly for the greatest good of all the citizens. So that I think, because if a leader has a strong expertise in a certain area, they may be blinded to other things, or skewed or prejudiced or just not be able to look at things differently. So yeah, I think leadership skills are something that we might want to start looking for in leaders in the future rather than these kind of skills, which is not to say I'm not into mastery, because I am. I just was pulling that out of the leadership definition of good characteristics.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious. So we were talking before. We're going to segue hard here, folks. So put on your seatbelts and your helmets, all right? So we were talking before about tarot stuff before the call, right? And we were talking about things like the Thoth deck, which you've been doing a bunch of work with, right? And the Rider-Waite and the differences around those decks, and like how there's so many iterations of one but not of the other, and a bunch of this kind of stuff, right? And I'm wondering what do you see as the difference in those things, right? And I kind of like, because I think that there's something in there that maybe highlights things that are much broader than just tarot, but might be easier to kind of like look at within tarot, and then kind of continue this conversation of expertise and knowledge and other kinds of things,
Oh, that's a juicy question that could go in a million different directions.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe I'll preface it by, no, I won't, because it's not pertinent. So the differences between the two decks in a broader way that might be applicable in other areas.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, let's start. All right. So here's a random thing that I read recently. And speaking of expertise, it was not from a Johns Hopkins level tarot source, so I don't know if it's true or not.
Uh-huh.
But I heard, because I was looking up what we were just talking about, differences between Rider-Waite and the Thoth deck. And one of the things I read was that you could see the difference in philosophy of the creators, and thereby presumably the philosophy of the deck itself, in the Fool cards for each deck. And so the Rider-Waite Fool has the sun kind of above and behind him, the sun representing God or the divine, so it's above and outside of you. Whereas with the Thoth Fool, the sun is right at the groin area, showing that the divine or God is within you. And in fact, if you look at it as at the root chakra, it's at the root of who you are. You are divine, manifest, or whatever. So that's one thing. If that is true and not just someone saying, oh, I'm just going to say things, that would be a huge difference between them. The location of authority, maybe. Where does authority reside? Ultimate authority. So since you know more about the Thoth, I'm going to let you respond to that.
Well, you think I have an answer to this question? I just ask you questions. I don't ever have the answers.
No, but I'm asking you in discussion terms, so it's not the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a question of like, are we in exile, right? I mean, or are we not, right? And I think that we could say that the Fool and the Rider-Waite talks about, and the Rider-Waite journey is essentially a journey returning back to Eden, right? It's returning back to heaven in the world card, right? And although we can sort of understand some of those implications in the Thoth deck, right? And I think that, the thing that you need to understand is that Crowley is in fact deeply, deeply Christian in his structure, right? Like his stuff is deeply, deeply Christian, despite the fact that it would appear not to be at all, right? But it's just more on the mystic front than on the sort of church. So, the thing is if we're in exile, right? If we're in a journey away from the source of spirit, right, or the source, it's a very different matter than if we are never disconnected from it, right? And I think that if we were going to talk about that kind of symbolism or that kind of worldview, I think that certainly that Gnostic underpinning of the Thoth deck, which is we have that divine within us and we are never separated from it, versus the more sort of exoteric Christian notion that we are here and we will eventually return somewhere else. I think that is part of it for sure, right? And I wonder if we're going to apply this to the world, right? As I so presumptuously put out there as a notion, I wonder if there are ways in which feeling connected or disconnected are relevant to the conversation at large in our society these days, right? Certainly, you talking about we need initiations speaks to that notion of needing a sense of connection, right? Because it's one of the things it provides. But maybe in other ways too. I don't know.
Yeah. Yes. And it is also interesting that the subtle difference too is if you think of the divine as something you're disconnected from and trying to get toward, that might lead to questions that you may ask the tarot that are more like, what should I do? Or what am I supposed to do? Or what is the best thing for me to do? Because it has that implication that there's something outside that knows what's best. Whether it's, God or the divine or a plan or how the universe unfolds. So it's like asking for, or assuming someone or something else knows better than you what you should do. And the Thoth one is more like, well, at least the little bit I've read so far, and not Crowley himself yet, I'm just starting that, but Lon Milo DeCat has been a big help, has had my other teacher, Andrew McGregor. His work has helped me a lot too. It feels like the way this deck was developed, maybe I'm reading into it, but it's more about doing the right thing because it's the right thing, rather than doing something because it'll get you what you want.
I mean, I think that in the two polarities that we're kind of talking about here, I think that it's a question of like internal, like us deciding or us sort of working to understand what it is that we should do versus asking what we should do. I think that from if you're in the sort of we're exiled from spirit or exiled from heaven kind of point of view, then certainly it's deeply external, right? And from that point of view, asking internally seems like ego, right? But from the point of view of being connected internally by spirit, right? Asking internally is a path to the same way. It's just a short path, right? It's not necessarily that we're asking our ego or thinking about it cognitively. It's that we are connecting to that piece of source that exists within all of us, right? But it is our personal sort of piece of that and looking for the direction there, right? The sort of notion of like discovering your will or discovering your path or discovering your purpose. It seems like there's these choices where one hopes that, God or somebody's going to tell you what it is, or we have to sort of sort it out. And in magic, there's a lot of, dialogue around sort of connecting with your guardian angel and that informing you of that. But I don't even think that it's ever an answer in the overt sense that people really believe it to be, right? I think that it's so much more a matter of connection and alignment, of truly understanding who we are. I think Jung and his individuation is not the same, but not so far off, right? So I think that this idea that when I think of we need to look inwards and find those answers, I mean that in a transcendental way, right? And in a way that goes beyond our ego at some level, and then working to integrate that down. And to me, I'm not sure that either one is less relying on something that seems external. I think that if we think about those higher parts of ourselves, or this, whatever we want to call it, our soul or our Ori or our guardian angel, or this, that, or the other thing, I think that they are 100% integrated, and for our brains, they're still external. They still function externally. So,
right.
Yeah.
What's interesting is, we can talk about these subtle differences all day long, but I think what we would discover, and what tarot readers throughout time and space, even today, discover is tarot works. It works, and it reminds me of, do you watch the British baking show?
I've seen a few of those. Yeah.
You're at least aware of it. Well, they have this one segment each show they call the technical challenge, which all the bakers are given the exact same ingredients and the same recipe, and they do it. And then they all turn out differently because different people are baking them. And if you listen to the judges on the technical challenge, almost always for every single one that they taste, they'll say, well, it tastes fine. It may not have risen properly or blah, 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 whatever, but the taste is fine. And it's like, yeah, they all taste fine because they all have the same ingredients in them. And, sometimes I think when I get too much in my head with the tarot and which one is, what is better, is one better, what am I looking for? I have to just remember it's all tarot. It all has the same basic ingredients. And so whatever you do, it's going to be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think... go ahead.
Oh, but I still do love talking about the subtle differences between them. And I think they're fascinating and important. Like one of the shifts in the two decks, Rider-Waite has the Justice card, and the Thoth deck has Adjustment. Now, I don't know about most people, but when I'm using a deck that has different titles than Rider-Waite, I use the titles that the deck came with, because names are important and they mean different things.
Sure.
And can have subtle implications, even if they're not really big changes. And so I think the comparing justice and adjustment are really, really interesting, and support the idea that you were just saying. Rider-Waite seems to have an external focus and the Thoth is more internal, because the justice card in Rider-Waite feels like it could be earthly or legal, governmental justice, or it could be karmic justice, but it's still an external judging of the situation and meting out the rewards or punishments. The adjustment card, when I listened to a class about that, I was really struck with how different it was, where it feels like adjustment is more like you're looking at yourself, your own actions, your own behaviors, and you're making constant adjustments as you go along in your life. Mm-hmm. So that's more of an internal loci, an internal fulcrum point for that action. It's internal rather than external. So again, it's similar, but it's a subtle difference, and it's still fun to talk about, right?
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. So what is it you are interested in about or interested in getting from your journey into the Thoth stuff?
I can tell you.
Tell me.
All I ever wanted from life was a completely elegant, beautiful, unified philosophy that represents the reality. That's all I want. Now, at different points in my life, I've sworn that I've given up that quest and accepting life as it is, messy and chaotic and not orderly and duh. But then, I get tired of that nonsense, and I want some unified system. So I'll tell you, one of the things that has always bothered me all these years, writing about tarot, designing decks, whatever, one thing that has always bothered me is I feel like if you're going to have a structure, the structure should mean something. It should matter. It should definitely influence what the cards mean. And with the Rider-Waite deck, I would do what we all do when we teach people to read. You combine the number with the suit, and that helps you find the meaning of the card, at least a good way to get started without trying to memorize a bunch of things. Problem I always had is the further down the numbers I would go, the harder it is to find one word that can apply to all four suits, at least with the Rider-Waite pictures. And I don't think it's fair to say something like, okay, the keyword for 2, and then you give 4 keywords, one that goes with each card. That's not a keyword for 2. That's right. Keywords for those cards. And I found, as I've been, trying to, and I couldn't find a good number system that, even when I look at Pythagorean number system, once you get past 5, it all gets crazy. And so I've been always dissatisfied with the Rider-Waite number system, and at least the way we use it modernly, because I understand it goes back to Golden Dawn, but that's far away from the way we teach it now. And so what I'm really excited about with the Thoth is that I'm hoping for, a Sephiroth means what it means. And that's what the number means. And that's going to apply to all 4 of the cards. But then I started doing a little chart because I wanted to make sure that works and is true. And I'm like, but how can these seem so disparate? They don't seem connected at all. It's all still chaos and confusion. And then I read or heard somewhere that it's easier to do that with the upper numbers, because the further down the tree of life you go, the more differentiated everything becomes. That blew my mind. That is now I understand why sometimes the 6s, definitely 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s, can be really difficult to pigeonhole with one word, because it fits all 4 suits, because they've become so differentiated. So what I'm looking for from the Thoth is a structure that makes sense. There's no arbitrariness in it. Because I feel like if I'm going to give up, if I'm going to turn to something for guidance, I want it to be...
What are you giving up? I'm so curious.
Giving up... if I'm going to give up some of, I was going to say free will, but I stopped myself because that isn't what it is at all. But give up part of my brain space where I take in, no, that's bullshit. Well, I guess if I'm going to give up some of my free will to a deck of cards, it better well have a good system to it.
Yeah. I think it is a thing that people, I think it's a fascinating point, right? Number one, we'll go back and talk about the numbers and whatever. I have stuff I could say about that, but I think that this idea of giving up, right? Or giving up free will. I mean, in the Orisha traditions, right? The Orishas speak, and we don't need to abdicate our power and our consciousness, but we're also intended to listen, right? And there is a degree of accepting that they know more, right? And that is really hard for people. It's really hard for Western people, especially. It's probably hard for people everywhere to some extent, but it's really difficult, right? Because it requires some sense of faith, right? And one of the things that I appreciate, to kind of pull a couple points together you were talking about, is that for me, and sort of having a good understanding of the theology and the sort of universal model of Orisha-ness, right? It is a model of everything, right? There is nothing that falls outside of it. And it's also something that I appreciate about the Thoth system, right? Whether it's, there are problematic pieces with it. There are pieces that deviate from history, right? I mean, if we're talking about Western Kabbalah versus Judaic Kabbalah, they're different things. But I think that more than any other sort of system that I've run into, it, and certainly in the cards, it comes through this way. It is a theory of everything, right? And while we can apply tarot to everything, it's not necessarily, it's applicable to everything, but it's not a theory of everything, if that makes sense as a distinction, But if we're going to accept that we're going to work within a structure, it does require us to yield something, right? Is it free will? Is it not? We could say it requires us to accept our discerning that we believe this to be true, maybe, right? But that in and of itself sort of speaks to the need to be coherent in our approach to it to fully understand it, right? So, yeah.
Were you going to say things about the numbers?
I will say some things about the numbers. So, I mean, I think that number one, I think that keywords is a questionable practice in my experience, right? Like, not that it doesn't work, but I think that it is. I think that it is a learning tool versus a thing that's actually longer term inherently helpful unto itself, right? And I think that a lot of people that I have had conversations with sort of arrive at keywords and stay at keywords when I think it's more like running drills than it is playing the game, right? But I think that if we're going to talk about the Thoth deck and sort of thinking about that, right? There are these four worlds, right? And at the top world, we have this sort of undifferentiated archetypal idea. And I think that keywords make tons of sense there. When we drift down through these four worlds and we're living, on this plane or, whatever we want to call that lower level, I think that the complexities of matter in motion, aren't helpful necessarily to have a singular word for it, and that to some extent the whole system is a little bit holographic, right? So you can see the movement, right? Like, it's why the tetragrammaton formula is so key to the Thoth deck, right? Because if you understand how that works and the pieces of that, and you understand that as a holographic model of the universe, that is, whatever scale you want to look at things, it is real. It is part of what's going on. So whether that's cellular or astrophysics or, cosmologically or theologically or whatever, it is at some level at play everywhere, right? But the conversation needs to change a lot, because we're not going to necessarily talk about, we could talk about the similarities between planets and the cells in our bodies, but it's not necessarily particularly instructive aside from, a brief conversation and a curiosity about, well, they're self-contained and where's the cells are self-contained, whatever. It doesn't go anywhere beyond a certain level, right? And I think that that's where power of tarot is, that it steers the conversation to where those comparisons are profound versus where those conversations are just a byproduct of living in a holographic universe. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. So I heard someone who uses the Thoth deck say that while they didn't care for the art, they still used the deck because it was the right fit for them, very powerful, and they could feel the spirits or the spirit of the cards coming through this artwork. And I've long wondered why there hasn't been a really, as far as I know, hugely successful, like a next generation of the Thoth deck, like there has been with Rider-Waite. What do you think about that idea of the cards themselves, not the pieces of paper having spirits or whatever, but being like a portal or a contact area because of the art itself?
Well, I mean, when people talk about thelema, which is the sort of general term or a general term for the sort of branch of magic and all this stuff that Crowley got into, right, or created or received or whatever, people often talk about that as being a current, right? And in the same way that, like, maybe chaos magic might be a current, or other things might have this sort of energetic line, right, that you can connect to. And so I think that the artwork in this is so deeply considered that it is that I think it creates a connection to that stuff, right, to that energy, and I think that it is perhaps more magical maybe than other things, or than some other things. I think that the artwork in the Thoth, in the, say, Rider-Waite deck, right, is more arbitrary in places, right? Pamela Coleman Smith was, from my understanding, sort of left alone in many ways with the minor cards and stuff like that, right? That doesn't come from a cohesive view or whatever. It comes from her artistic connection, maybe some movement of spirit and whatever, but it's a very different thing, right? But I'm always unclear what people mean when they talk about connecting to spirits or connecting to the energy of the deck, or people will say stuff like, this deck talks this way, or this deck's chatty and this deck's not, and all these kinds of things. And I absolutely get that something is going on there, but I don't actually know what that is, right? And I've spent a lot of time over the years talking to people and inquiring and thinking about it and so on, and never really getting to an answer about it, right? Because it's one of those things that largely falls outside of my experience, When I read cards, I use the artwork and I use my experience, and I talk to the specific spirits that I work with, who I know by name, who have agreed to help me read cards for people, and maybe people's ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
And those pieces essentially coalesce to create the reading, right? Did I say study? It's study, like historic study of symbolism and history. And the people who have these other experiences, it's so far outside of my experience that I've never really been able to understand it. So, so when people say they connect to the spirit of the deck or this or that, or they feel, like people say with the Thoth, I feel the dark energy around it and I don't like it. Some people really dislike it. And that's 100% fair. And you should always listen when you have a reaction like that to stuff. But personally, I don't understand it. Like I don't ever have those things. Sometimes I have aesthetic judgments, I'm like, I really don't like, I actually don't like the art in the Rider-Waite deck, right? I'm just like, it's okay. It's not that great, but that's just personal taste. That's not the deck itself or whatever. And I don't interpret that as being the spirit of the deck telling me to go away, and I don't think that that's what's going on. I think people are having other kinds of experiences that I don't understand. Maybe some of them are psychological. Maybe some of them are their spirits don't like that deck, right? Or maybe they're experiencing a spirit that speaks more strongly through one deck than through another. But in terms of it deriving directly from the creation of the art and the deck itself, I just don't really, I've never experienced it. So if that's what's going on, it's beyond my scope of understanding. So,
Yeah. I don't know that many people who use this deck either exclusively or a lot. So when I do run into someone like that, I like to ask these questions to find out, is this a common shared experience amongst people who use this deck, or is it as individual as, people who have psychic experiences using the Rider-Waite? That's not a universal thing either.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think I would say it's probably not a universal thing. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
It is funny when, people feel like a deck has a certain personality or interacts with them in a certain way. Because I don't have that with every deck I pick up by any means.
Yeah.
There have been a few that feel like that. And part of me really believes I'm just projecting where I'm at right now onto that deck, or what I need, or my subconscious knows what I need. And so it's projecting that maybe, because the little bit of work I've done for myself with the Thoth deck, I imagine it being very sarcastic and very, witty and clever, and having a voice like that, but I feel like that's just me entertaining myself with that. Do you ever do that with your cards when you read for yourself?
So my readings are the same regardless of what deck I do. Doesn't really matter. So I predominantly only read with Marseille decks because the primary spirit that I work with people for doing divination basically said to me at one point, look, dude, if you want to give good readings, read with this deck. If you don't really care, then do whatever you like, right? And so for, I don't even know how long now, a very long time, I've been reading only with Marseille decks because that spirit prefers it. And but whether I read with a Thoth deck, whether I read with, something if I'm at a conference and we're sitting there and I'm partnered with somebody, I'll just ask them if I could read with whatever deck they have, right? Because to me it doesn't really matter, and to me the process of reading and the way I read and what I'm going to say, it's not really going to be changed too much by what deck I'm going to work with or whatever, right? So in that sense, I feel like my presentation of my process of reading is 100% consistent, whether I have the Rider-Waite deck, whether I have this, whether I have that. Maybe the stories will change a little bit. Maybe I will, certainly if there's an element that's in one deck that I'm reading with that I can then point at and talk about something from the art as part of the story, I will do so. And that will change depending on the deck that I'm with, but it doesn't change the voice of what I'm saying. And if I was using a different deck, I would probably articulate the same message, but I wouldn't be like, well, but look in this, and look at the way the horse is, or look at whatever's going on here. We know that in this Hierophant, it's Chiron, and Chiron is the centaur, and blah, 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 blah. I might tell a different story, or I might just tell that information without the story. But the voice of it, the articulation of it, the process of delivering a reading feels 100% constant across all of the deliveries that I might give to somebody. So, yeah.
It must be nice to be that mentally stable. I feel like I have no idea what that's like.
I don't know if it's about that or not. I mean, I actually wonder if it's a product of, I read exclusively with one deck for 15 years. And then when I started reading, because for the first long stretch when I read for people publicly, I only read with the Thoth deck. And the only reason I branched out from the Thoth deck was because I found myself, I was doing 30 hours a week of readings for people, right? Sit down face-to-face readings for half an hour to stretch, So doing a lot of readings. And I was just kind of finding myself getting into a rut, right? I felt like I was just looking oh, well, the Ace of Wands talks about blah, and slide out of being present, slide into just being a talking head, right? And so I branched out into other decks to shake that up. I got into working with the Hermetic deck a lot. What's the other deck I used? I tried the Handel deck and didn't really like it. But I tried some other stuff. I used the Jungian Tarot a lot by Robert Wang, and I shook it up just to kind of make myself be present again and not sort of just go on autopilot, And then when I migrated out of that, whenever that was now, a long time ago now, then for the last 12 years or something, I've only been reading Marseille decks for clients, and pretty much always the same deck. So,
I studied Marseille during quarantine too. Been doing a lot of studying.
Yeah.
And in fact, hopefully, fingers crossed, I'm teaching a class for Tabby this winter at their virtual conference. And I'm going to be doing a comparison of the Rider-Waite, Marseille, and Thoth deck.
Cool.
Compare and contrast. And so I did do some Marseille study. And one of the things that I like about that deck is that it feels like it's easier to be objective and it's less overly dramatic. Because we like to say all the cards have a variation of a range of meaning.
Sure.
But when you lay down a card that has a huge heart pierced by 3 swords, it's hard to see the variation in meanings, right? It's very dramatic. And so it makes, stories real or readings, it's dramatic. And I like about the Marseille that it felt like it was more of an objective system, so that you, the reader, could interpret more appropriately for the question being asked. Now, you read this deck for people. What do you think of that notion?
I think I think that I like it because it's easy to, it's easy for what needs to come up, right? And maybe I will reference esoteric stuff, Thoth stuff, things like that. Maybe I'll tell a story about this. I'll be like, oh, well, if we were doing this, we'd be talking about, the journey from the path of the earth to the path of the moon and what that entails and what that means in, initiatory tradition and all blah, 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 right? Maybe I'll share that conversation with somebody around something, right? But maybe I won't, right? Maybe I'll just be like, read it visually, read it, whatever. Maybe we'll just talk about psychology. And I think that it really allows for, as you kind of say, it's hard when you look at a card and it shows something specific. It's hard to have a conversation that's from a broader range of tarot understanding if the artwork is from a narrow spectrum of that, and that's fine, but it allows for a lot of stuff, right? I also find for me, the Marseille is a great holding place for psychic stuff. It's very easy to look at things and see things that aren't there, which is sort of a way in which messages will come to me. And I'll be like, oh, I'm looking at this and this thing looks like a stomach and blah, blah, blah. How's your stomach? What's going on? Or what have you, right? The best example was I flipped the Ace of Swords for somebody, and the base of the crown that the sword goes through immediately looked like a stomach to a person, to me. And I looked at the Ace of Swords going through it, and I'm like, oh, are you planning on having some kind of stomach surgery? And they're like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I was like, great. Cards say it's great for you, and you should definitely do it. It's going to fix your problems and blah, blah, whatever, right? But it's like, what does that have to do with anything? It has to do with the fact that it makes a lot more space for me to see things. And not to say that might not happen with other things too, but it's one of the things I like about it. For me, it kind of allows magic, card reading, psychology, and art and all those pieces to flow together in a really profound and powerful kind of way. So, yeah. And I'm actually gearing up. I'm going to be teaching late January. I'm going to teach my class on the Marseille deck.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so it's the last time I'm going to teach it live. I'm wrapping up a bunch of stuff these days where I'm like, I'm teaching this one more time and then I'm done. And it'll be available by recording, but it's not quite the same, right? So. Yeah.
No, it's still good though. Recordings are good. So yeah. Oh, well, let me know when you're teaching it. I want to maybe check that out. But okay, here's something, I don't know. Hopefully the life we're all living now won't be going on for much longer. Maybe the vaccines will work and we'll be able to gather again someday soon. Yeah. But just in case not, I'll share something, or for people who can't get out or can't travel to places. This is a thing that I've been doing that has been the one thing that has saved me through this quarantine period, is recorded tarot classes and workshops. Yeah. Because I can, what I do, okay, sitting and watching them by myself, zero fun, lots of mind wandering, not wonderful. Instead, I have a buddy, and we don't live near each other, so we just meet on Zoom, and we watch these classes together, and because they're recorded, we can stop them whenever we want, talk about whatever we want, discuss things, look things up, back up. I mean, we generally spend at least as much time talking about whatever the teacher just said as the teacher did. Mm-hmm. And it's just phenomenal. It makes it so much better. So, for anybody out there who can't travel to conferences, or if we can't travel still, and you want to take an online class, I suggest taking it with a friend and watching them together, because it makes it way better if you're going to do a recorded class. So it's been super valuable to me.
Yeah. It's so much better to have people to discuss stuff with, right? Mm-hmm. To be able to share and whatever, it's nice to do it on your own, and as a person who I didn't know anybody else who was into this stuff for a tremendously long time, right? So I just read it a lot myself and whatever. And that's cool and all, but it's hard, right? It's a hard road, you know? And I'm all for, like, if there's an easier road, hop on that easier road, do the easier things. And definitely having some people to talk stuff through is super duper helpful. Yeah.
Yep, it is.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll wrap it up there. Find a buddy, do a thing. Go
Find
out
a
there.
buddy.
Find your universal model of the universe and dig into it. Don't be afraid of yielding some level of control to it once you find the thing you feel drawn to. I personally would say it'll take you a lot of places that'll be really beneficial, right? Mm-hmm. Having belonged to a bunch of low-key cults as opposed to like horrible cults, you know, there's a lot to be said for finding that right balance of recognizing some kind of other authority or other truth and feeling that discomfort of it around your ego resisting accepting it, you know, and exploring that and seeing what that's about, you know, because sometimes, you know, and like certainly if you got a big red flag, run away. You know, there are a lot of horrible things out there in the world, so please don't take it that way. But there's also stuff where it benefits us to sort of chafe against it a little bit and look at that and see where those discomforts are and be like, what is that there? Oh, is that about my parents, my upbringing? Or is it about what's actually going on here? Or is it about whatever? You know, I think it's really fruitful, to do that kind of work.
And that is, no matter what deck you use, that seems to be one of the universal themes in tarot is balance, finding the right balance. For
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Barbara, I know you're not on social media still, so where do people come to connect with you?
The easiest thing is my website because it has my email on it. So email is great. If we get to be good enough friends, we can text even on the phone. But www.tarotshaman.com. Or you can just Google Barbara Moore Tarot. That's even easier, and you'll find my website. So email me, reach out. I'd love to chat.
Perfect. All right. And I will put stuff about the classes discussed and other things in the show notes. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. And thank you for making time, Barbara.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was great fun. Now I will talk to you later.
So I hope you enjoyed that episode. I was digging around looking at what was happening with the podcast as I was getting ready to relaunch, and I realized that I've been doing these podcasts episodes for 10 years now, which struck me as a really long time. And there are, including this one now, 116 episodes for you to listen to. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I really would love it if you can consider doing some or all of the following things. Please lend some support to the podcast through Buy Me a Coffee or through the direct links in my bio, and certainly share this everywhere. You know, it's harder and harder in these digital spaces to kind of get your message out, and the algorithms tend to work against sharing things like this when you're the creator. So do me a favor, share it somewhere. You know, you can repost it, you can share it to your stories, you can, tell your friends about it. All of that helps me continue to move this ahead and share what I think is a great body of work that I think we really need these days. Not something that's 15 or 30 seconds long, but a long, deep, and thoughtful conversation with some people who've been really digging in and doing a lot of work to become an expert in their fields. So, thanks again. I will be back next week and every week for the following 5 weeks for this first season of 2021.